All right, everybody. Let me just make a quick video. Well, let me stop myself. It's not going to be quick because I have a lot of stuff to kind of cover. This is going to be essentially if you are going to miss either today, Thursday the 18th, or tomorrow, Friday the 19th, something that can help you catch up or stay abreast of what it is we're talking about in class. Because this is our first kind of major text that we're going to read. It's going to take us 2 days to read it, most likely. So, with that being said, I want to make sure that we have something that you can refer back to in case you miss anything, in case you need to um, go back and refresh yourself or anything like that. So, at least you know the assignment, and then you know what to do, and then hopefully, as I kind of go through it, um, I'll possibly post a subsequent video after this kind of going through the poem itself, but we'll see about that. But so essentially, what is the sort of expectation for this? So, well, first off, Wednesday we did this. We did The Tiger by William Blake, which was kind of your entry point into romantic poetry and the sublime, and talking about nature and the beauty and the terror and everything like that. Now, this is a short poem. It's what, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 stanzas. So it's not an incredibly long poem. The poem that we are going to read next, Rime the Ancient Mariner, is a narrative poem. It's got, gosh, I don't even know how many stanzas, but it's so long it's broken up into 7 different sections or chapters or whatever you want to call it. So it is a longer poem. So this is a nice, if you were absent Wednesday, this is a nice way to sort of get you into kind of the not only the themes of romantic poetry, but also the writing style, because this was written in the 1790s, early 1800s. So the way that it was written was very I don't want to say antiquated or old, but it's kind of an old timey style of writing and speaking. And Rime of the Ancient Mariner follows that similar path. So there may be some parts, if you're reading this on your own, if you're doing something like that, that you might be like, huh, what does that mean? That's okay. That's natural. The way they talk is sort of, like I said, a little old, but hopefully, after hearing me kind of talk about it and kind of go through it, um, it'll make more sense. So that was yesterday, Wednesday. And this is also helpful in case you were also out Wednesday. You can go back and you can review this PowerPoint. Not everything on this PowerPoint is super critical. Like, I'm not going to ask you about couplets or triplets or quatrains or quintets or sestet. I'm not going to do any of that. There are certain things that are important. I'm not going to ask you about feet or any of that stuff. We'll get back to pentameter later as we talk about Shakespeare. That's not super important right now. But the really major stuff is the rhyme scheme stuff, and then the figurative language. All that stuff is stuff that is important. It is stuff that you need to know. So I would maybe go back and check that stuff out if poetry is something that you're a little rusty on. All right. So Rime of the Ancient Mariner material. So today we are going to start it. If I had to sort of predict how far we get into the poem, I would say probably either part 5 or part 4 or part 5. That's probably my best guess. Usually that's about how long it takes. It might not be that far into it. We might stop at part 3. It just kind of depends on uh, how it goes. So what I would recommend is I would probably, if you're at home and you're watching this, I would probably read to part 4 or part 5. Break it up about halfway through, and then that way tomorrow you can, if you're going to be out tomorrow as well, you can just finish it out. And if you're just going to be out tomorrow, then you can just kind of play it by ear. We'll see how far we'll get through it in class today, and then you can go forward from there. So what is the study guide? So it's this right here. It's not a very long study guide. It's only 13 questions. And these are questions that are primarily comprehension questions. if you are paying attention and following along with what is happening in the poem, these should be pretty simple questions to answer. Okay, so it's not that complicated for the study guide here, but it's those 13 questions. And if you are in class, we will fill these out as we go through it. Okay. Next, if you are at home and you need the full text of the poem, I've got that right here. And as I was saying, it is a lengthy poem, 17 pages when typed out like this. So it's not going to be something that you can just dip into for 5 minutes, while you're waiting for dinner to be ready and be done with it. Right? You're going to have to sort of like set aside some time, and that's why I kind of recommend today. If you're going to be out both days, maybe just kind of read half today, half tomorrow. If you're going to be out tomorrow, then just kind of finish it out tomorrow. Don't sort of try to read it in health class, right before coming into this class or something like that, because you're not going to get through it and you're not going to retain anything. So there's no point. So you may as well just set aside some time to at least read it in decent chunks. I would at least try to read a section at a time so that way you have natural breaks. So if you like, well, I don't have that much time, well, at least try to read a section at a time so that way you can try to internalize and figure out what's going on in each section before you move ahead. Because it is sometimes a little difficult to kind of understand what's happening. And then here, this is a reading of the poem on YouTube that I really like. And so this is another easy tool for you if you're like an auditory learner and it helps you to not just read something off a page but have somebody read it to you. I would highly recommend you listening to this because he's a much better reader and actor and everything than I am in class. So I would say listen to that and follow along as you listen. Don't just listen, please. Don't just listen. Read the poem as you listen. Okay, follow along, because if you just listen, it's gonna just fly right over your head. Okay, I've also posted these. These are Miss Trowell's Rime and the Ancient Mariner summary slides. Let me preface this by saying, while it does give you summaries for each part of the poem, it does not serve as a substitute for reading the poem and filling out the study guide. Okay. These are just tools to help sort of orient you and keep you on track as you're reading. So in case you get to a part, and so, sometimes you read really old literature, you get to a part and you're kind of like discombobulated, like, well, I'm not sure what just happened, or, I think I know what happened, but it's kind of vague and ambiguous. You go back, you look at the summary, and just make sure that it lines up with what you read. Okay. It does not serve as a substitute. Okay. So make sure that you kind of clock that. All right. But it is a helpful tool that is there for you as well. All right. So, I could post like a 1 hour long lecture video of me going through each individual stanza line by line and explaining each thing to you. But I don't have that kind of time, and honestly, the major keys are going to be gotten through reading it. So what I will do is I will kind of go through these summary slides and kind of give you the general overview. So you can try reading it, and then once you finish the section, you can come back and cue this video up and listen to me talk about that section. And see, okay, so that's what he's saying. That's how it lines up with what I read. But again, don't think that this is a substitute for reading the poem. Okay, no video that I ever post in Google Classroom is going to be a pure substitute or replacement for actually doing the reading, because you have to do the reading. This is something that it may not be the type of reading that you like to do. It may not be the type of reading that really kind of grabs you. But it is the reading that we have to do. And it is the reading that teaches you a lot of important things about romanticism, about romantic writing, and about the themes of romanticism. So it is important work, and it is something that, while you can have me explain it to you, the quote unquote Cliff's Notes or Sparks Notes version, but it's not going to be the same. So that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to go through these summary slides. Actually, one more thing. Hang on one second. Okay, I'm back. I had to post something in Google Classroom real quick. So this is the definition of the sublime. Okay, so especially with Rime of the Ancient Mariner, not so much with the novel that we read in this class, Dr. Jekyll, but definitely with Rime of the Ancient Mariner. You're going to see romantic themes of like nature and the natural world, and specifically the sublime. And if you want a kind of recap or refresher on what the sublime is and what the sublime sort of refers to, this is a very helpful document. I just took this from the University of Idaho, and it basically tells more or less what the sublime is in a really sort of simple, easy to comprehend kind of way. And so, without necessarily just reading the whole thing to you, it's basically just talking about, what is the sublime experience? What does it mean to experience the natural world that instills awe and wonder and beauty in you? What is it? How does it connect to God and this idea of God and God in the natural world and all that stuff? And where can you find it? What sort of places, what sort of environments might you encounter the sublime? And so all that is something that is helpful in case that's a definition or a word that has been giving you some trouble. Okay, so I posted that in Google Classroom just now, actually, so that way hopefully that is another resource for you. All right. So, like I said, I'm not going to read the entire poem line by line for you. That's what you're for. But I am going to kind of go through with this part of the video and sort of summarize section by section. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you have not read the poem yet and you're reading this or you're watching this at home, go through, excuse me, read it section by section. And after each section, you can pause this video and then come back to it, and then you can sort of talk about it or play it and listen to me talk about it, and sort of go over kind of the general overview of what happens. And again, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty details, all right? But it is important for you to read it yourself and then come back and listen, so that way you can say, yeah, that's what happened. That's what I thought happened, or I didn't realize that happened. So now that makes make more sense, right? Sometimes that's how it works. So first off, I want to talk about the title. So, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So this is important. The title itself, whenever we look at a poem, the first thing we always should do is break down the title first, right? So the title is actually very important here. So first off, the subject is rhyme. The what? The rhyme. Now, when we say rhyme, we think rhyme as in, roses are red, violets are blue, I love chocolate, so do you, right? Um, like rhyme, that's what we think of. And obviously it's a poem and it's going to have rhyme scheme and things like that in it. But this is not the normal spelling of the word rhyme. And if you look up this word, R-I-M-E, you'll find out very quickly that that is a different word than, roses are red, violets are blue rhyme. R-I-M-E rhyme is a word that means frost. Okay. It's the frost that like sticks to things. So like, when you get out in the morning and you have frost on your windshield, that's rhyme. Okay. And so the title has a little play on words. So the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it's obviously the poem of the Ancient Mariner. It's going to rhyme, but it's also the cold, the frost of the Ancient Mariner. And how is that going to play a role? Well, we're going to find out. So ancient, obviously meaning old. So whoever this mariner is, he's old. Well, what's a mariner? A mariner is somebody who sails on the sea. It comes from the word marine, right? So he's a seafarer. He's a sailor, and he is old. This is a poem telling his story, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. but he's also going to be cold because there's also rime as in frost. So it's a mariner who's old and a mariner who's cold, right? So Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And so if you look at these images here, all three of these little images on this slide sort of play a very crucial role in the story in some way. Obviously, we mentioned he's a mariner, so the boat is going to play a role, obviously. The bird in the middle we'll come back to. On the far right, you have eyeball, and the eyeballs of the ancient mariner are very important to the story because they're kind of hypnotic, right? And like if you look at his eyes, you kind of like get lost in them, right? And that's going to be important. So then the bird in the middle. Let me actually. So this is an albatross. An albatross is a type of seabird that is very common in southern parts of the world. It is a very big bird, as you can tell. You know, it is a large, large bird. It is also whenever you sailors see an albatross, it is a bird that symbolizes good luck or good fortune, and that's also going to be very important as we go through. Let's talk about section one. So, one thing to understand about this poem is that it has something. If I can write well with this pen, oh gosh, I can barely write with this. Okay. So it has something called a frame story. And so this poem is a narrative poem. It tells a story. But one of the interesting things that this poem does is it essentially tells two stories. Okay. So think of it like a stack of books on a bookshelf, right? So we got a stack of books, right? So they're on the bookshelf, the stack of books. Typically, if it's just a couple books, on either side, you put something to hold the books up so they don't fall over. They're called bookends, right? So, for example, maybe I take a block, put it here, and then a jar, put it on the other side. Maybe down so you can see. So, I'm not really doing a good job, but so these are bookends on either side. Okay. Now, a frame story works in a similar way to bookends. Okay. You have the central story, which are the books in the middle, but then you have the frame story, which happens at the beginning and at the end of the main story. Okay, so think of it like a picture frame. A picture frame is meant to show a picture, but you don't care about the frame. Okay, you care about the picture that's in the frame, right? So the frame story is a story that sets up another story, right? So if you want an example of this, think of a story or a movie or a book where you've had some character. And the example I always kind of go to is The Princess Bride, if you've seen that movie. Some character who he's basically saying, "How did this happen?" And then the other character says, "Well, let me tell you a story." And then you have this like, and then it goes into a totally different story. And then at the end, it comes back to those two characters, and the guy says, "And that's how it all happened." And the other character's like, "Wow, that's a frame story." So, The Princess Bride, you have a child who's sick in bed, and his grandpa comes to read him a book, right? And the book is The Princess Bride. And so, he's like, "I don't want to hear the story." And the grandpa's like, "Well, just wait, listen. And then he tells the story. And then all of a sudden it jumps into this fantasy world where you've got the characters who are like the pirate and then the six-fingered man and everything else. And so that becomes the main story is the actual Princess Bride. But then at the end of the movie, it comes back to the kid who's sick in bed with his grandpa. And he's like, "Wow, grandpa, that was a really cool story." That's a frame story, right? It kind of serves as the frame for the main story, right? This is a very long-winded explanation, but basically, so the frame story for this poem, it's not the main story, it's just the frame, it's the setup. The frame story is a wedding. There is a wedding going on, and there is a wedding guest. Okay. And the mariner is like this old, decrepit, wrinkly old man. And he grabs the wedding guest on his way into the church for the wedding. And he grabs him and he looks into his eyes and he says, I have a story to tell you. And the wedding guest is like, let go of me, weirdo. I have to go to a wedding. But he looks into his eyes. And again, we talked about how his eyeballs are kind of hypnotic, and he sort of feels captivated and entranced by them. And so he just sits down on a rock and is like, okay, tell me your story. And so the wedding guest is forced to listen to the mariner's story, and then you get your, and then we go back to what the mariner says. And then for the bulk of the poem, the mariner is the one talking about what he experienced, what happened to him. Okay. So the wedding guest will periodically, he'll sort of like every so often, interrupt him and be like, whoa, I can't believe that happened. But most of the time, it's going to be the wedding guest listening to the mariner tell his story. So, obviously, the mariner is a sailor. So his story begins. The mariner is a sailor, and he's on his way to the South Pole. And on his way to the South Pole in his ship, they get stuck in the ice. And obviously, this is the time period where you have sailing ships. And so if you're stuck in the ice in a boat like that, you can't really do much about it. You just kind of have to hope and pray that the ice eventually breaks open and allows your ship to sail on. So they're stuck in the ice. And then an albatross, which is that big bird I showed you, albatross shows up and the ice breaks and allows the ship to sail through, which the albatross already symbolizes good luck. But for the sailors who see that happen, it's like confirmation. And so now they're like, wow, yeah, the albatross really is good luck. So, but the mariner alludes to doing something very, very naughty to the albatross. He is going to kill the albatross. And the poem's interesting because it never explains why. It never says, oh, I killed the albatross because it was bugging me or annoying me or anything. Like, it never explains why the albatross is killed. The albatross is just there. It hangs out with the crew. The crew plays with it. The crew feeds it. It's almost like a class pet for the ship. And then one day, the mariner walks up with his crossbow and shoots the bird and kills it. And that random act of violence against nature is going to be a very important part of the story, because again, we talked about the romantic, we talked about the sublime, we talked about nature and how important it is to them. This random act of violence against nature is going to be something that kind of drives the main plot of the story. So let me get all that out of the way. Okay. All right. So part 2. So go back and read part 2 if you haven't read it yet. All right. So part 2, the wind's blowing, and the bird, which people had initially thought, okay, it's bringing good luck, it's bringing wind, right? Because you have to remember, these are sailing ships. They have these gigantic sails, and so if the wind stops, you can't get out and row. Like, these are gigantic ships. So if there is no wind, then your ship is DOA. It's stuck. Okay. So the wind's still blowing at first after he kills the albatross, but eventually the wind starts to die down, and then it stops completely, and so the ship is stuck, and all the men on board the ship are kind of going through their rations, going through their water, going through their food, and it's all starting to run out because they can't go anywhere and they can't obviously resupply. And the men aboard the ship kind of point their finger at the mariner and they say, look, this albatross was bringing us good luck. It was bringing us wind. It was bringing us safety and good fortune. And you just shot it for no good reason, right? And they start to blame him, and they're all getting dehydrated. and the ship's not moving. And so eventually they say, all right, we're going to make him carry the burden of the albatross, which literally means carry the bird in, which is we are going to take the bird and we're going to basically make you wear the bird around your neck like a necklace, right? And if you want to picture that, oh my gosh, I can't draw this, so bear with me. So if you want to picture that, you've got the mariner here, and then you've got the albatross, which is a really big bird, remember, hanging around his neck, which is a symbol of his, like I said, random act of violence against nature for no reason. He just, transgressed the normal relationship between man and nature, and as a result, nature has turned against him. And the sun is hot, the wind stopped blowing. All of nature has sort of rebelled against the mariner and his ship because of this crime against nature. And so he wears the albatross around his neck. And I didn't do a good job drawing it, so it's not really as obvious. But if you sort of take the basic shape of the bird hanging around the man's neck, it's similar to a cross. And if you've gone to church or you know anything about religion, there's this kind of expression to carry one's cross, right? Um, So, Jesus carried his cross, and to carry the cross represents sin, represents bad, right? Okay. And so what you have here is you have this sort of imagery, this idea of the mariner carrying the albatross around his neck represents his sin, his crime that he has yet to atone for. He has not been forgiven of his sin, and he is still being punished for his sin. And it's also important to remember, and it's a little detail, but the thing that he shot the albatross with, it was not just a bow and arrow. It was a what bow? A crossbow, right? So, um, so let me clear that. Come on. All right, part 3. Here's where it starts to get very imaginative and creative, right? Again, romantics, five eyes, imagination is super important to them. So here's where it starts to really sort of stretch realism, because so far it's not been a super unrealistic story, right? Everything that's happened so far is within the realms of possibility. Everything that has happened to them could, foreseeably or plausibly happen, right, to a ship's crew going to the South Pole. Now is when it starts to get really into weird territory. So they see a ship coming for them, and the ship is the sun is setting on the horizon, and the ship is between them and the sun, right? And so it's coming toward them. But remember, their ship is still stuck. There's no wind. So how is that ship coming toward them, right? Well, then the ship stops coming straight on and turns to the side to show the side of the ship. And then they can see the sun that's setting behind it shine through all the holes in the ship. And that's when they realize, oh, this isn't a real ship. This is a ghost ship. This is a ship that has a ton of holes in it and is, the sails all in tatters and everything. And they realize it's a ghost ship. And there's only 2 people on this ship. There is death, okay? Death itself, literally death personified. And then he calls it life in death, okay? Life in death. And some people, they ask what that means. Nowadays, we wouldn't say life and death. We would say undeath or the undead, right? So zombies, vampires, things like that. Things that are dead, but they are alive, right? And so basically what they're doing, is they are playing dice, death and life and death, for the lives of his crew. And they're playing the game, life and death wins. And you might think, okay, well, that's not so bad, right? It'd be worse if death had won the dice game. But think about it. Death is a release. It's a break. Um, it's peace, right? Life and death is you don't get to rest. You don't get to find peace. Okay. You die, but worse still, you don't find that rest. You don't find that peace after death, right? You come back. So life and death wins the lives of the crew. Okay. And after that, every single member of the crew starts dropping like flies. They all start just dropping dead. Okay. And the way that they drop dead is they all approach the mariner. They look him dead in the eyes with their, loathing, hateful looks, and then they die. Okay. So again, this idea of the eyes and the eye contact really sort of being a big deal. Okay. Part 4, the wedding guest is, he interrupts and is like, "Hey, am I sure I'm not speaking to a ghost here?" Um, so there is that. But the mariner says, I'm the sole survivor. I'm like Odysseus. I'm the one who didn't die." Okay. Um, and the mariner also, interestingly, all the crew's dead. He's the only one left now. But he can't die. He also can't pray. And so there's this idea of, okay, God is in nature. God is connected to nature. And because God is connected to nature, the fact that he committed this random act of violence against nature, this sin, this crime against nature, and he has not atoned for it, he has not been forgiven for it, means that no matter how much he tries to pray, it's not happening. It's like in Exodus when God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It's like Pharaoh can't come back, right? He's like, I've gone too far. I can't do this. And so he can't connect to God. And he only finds atonement for his sin when he sees these giant, monstrous water snakes that are slimy and squirming in the ocean. And he looks at them, and they had appeared earlier in the poem, and he had called them disgusting and slimy and nasty and everything else. And now he looks at them and he sees the beauty. He sees all the colors and the way the light kind of bounces off their scales and the little glistening trails they leave in the water after them. And he's like, that's beauty. And he blesses the nasty, disgusting water snakes. And when he does that, the albatross around his neck drops off and sinks to the bottom of the sea, which is a very sort of obvious callback to like biblical reference of your sin will be buried at the bottom of the ocean, right? I forget what book in the Bible that comes from, but there's this very obvious reference where his literal symbol that represents his sin drops off his neck. The albatross around his neck drops off and falls to the bottom of the sea, never to be seen again. And so now he's been forgiven because he's blessed nature. So his crime against nature is atoned for and forgiven by finding the beauty in nature and blessing nature. So there's this sort of, here was the crime, here is the appropriate way to solve the crime or find forgiveness for the crime that you committed, right? But his journey's not over yet because we still got 3 more sections. So he finally goes to sleep, and then the rain jumps down. And again, so initially, after he killed the albatross, it was like nature was turning against him and the crew. And now it seems like nature has forgiven him. It's raining. Oh, it's like the natural world has sort of forgiven him. And so what essentially happens is there's this giant ghost, I guess. There's really no other way to say it. This giant ghost shows up underneath the ship and carries it all the way back to port where it came from. And the crew come back to life as like zombies, more or less, and they start steering the ship and working the sails and everything else. And so They all come back to life as, like, I guess, ghost zombies, but they're not like evil zombies. They're not like, let me eat your brain kind of zombies. They're like zombies that are possessed by, they call them seraphim, which is a very old school kind of way of saying angels. So literally, a troop of angels has come to possess the bodies of the crew who have died, so that they can all safely make it back home. All right. So he wakes up, and he sees in the distance, he sees his home, he sees the steeple and the hill. Um, and then you get three new characters. Okay. There's a pilot, which is obviously just a dude who steers a boat, the pilot's son, and a hermit. And the hermit, if you don't know what a hermit is somebody who lives away from civilization. They live in nature, they live in the wilderness, they live away from society, right? That's important because the pilot and pilot's son come up to the ship. The ship sort of like all of a sudden just sinks to the bottom, like somebody drags it down. Maybe it's the spirit, who knows? And they just drag it down to the bottom. And so obviously the mariner's left floating, but luckily the pilot is there to pick him up in their boat. And the hermit is there, and the hermit basically takes the mariner, and here's the story, and he's the one who washes the blood, quote unquote, of the albatross off his hands, who forgives the mariner for his crime. Okay. Not a priest, not anything, but a hermit, someone who lives alone, out of civilization, in nature. So again, he committed a crime against nature. Nature rebelled against him. Wind stopped blowing, sun got really hot. He blesses nature, nature forgives him. Rain falls down, spirit comes up from underneath the water to carry the ship. And then the man who officially forgives him is a hermit, someone who lives in nature, who is part of nature, right? More so part of nature than any other body. All right. So the mariner tells a story, and he feels the sting, the pain in his heart go away. And after telling his story to the mariner, he realizes that, I've been forgiven, but it doesn't excuse or carry away the crime that I committed. And so the idea is, I have to, every so often I'll get this like burning pain in my chest, and I can't alleviate it. I can't fix it until I go tell somebody the story of what happened. And that's when we kind of zoom out and we kind of go back to the frame story where he's talking to the wedding guest, and he tells the wedding guest, this is what I learned from this experience. And I had to tell you because I knew that you were the person that I had to tell when I saw you from a distance. And so, that's kind of the mariner's curse. Like, he has to tell the story to the people who need to hear it every so often. And so he tells the wedding guest that, and at this point the wedding's over. It's been, happening in the background, and it's already over. The bride's coming by and everything else. And so the wedding guest sort of like gets up and stumbles. He's kind of like, wow, that's crazy, man, gnarly. And he has essentially taken away the main message of the story. And this is when the author, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, kind of goes over the main moral of his poem. That being, all creatures, all living things have beauty. They are made by God and they are loved by God. And it does not matter whether we're talking about a snake or a snail or a slug or a beaver or a bear or a muskrat or anything. It does not matter what we're talking about. They were all made by God. They were all loved by God. And so no matter what, if you love the least of these creatures, then you love God, right? And so there's a very sort of religious connection here at the very end of this poem, right? And so that's essentially the main takeaway of the poem. Okay. And this is just general sort of recapping romanticism elements in there. Obviously, we talked about the imagination. It's very creative, very imaginative. Lots of crazy stuff happens in it. Obviously, nature, the sublime. When you're in the South Pole, obviously those giant icebergs and those giant mountains, they just instill awe. And then there's the sea itself. It's so deep, it's so vast, it's so huge, right? It's so sublime. Uh, and then the poem has lots and lots of imagery and figurative language in there as well. So that's essentially sort of the breakdown of Rime and Ancient Mariner. Again, hopefully this sort of summary helps you. Again, don't treat it as a substitute for the reading. Okay, you need to read it. Let me just reiterate that. But yeah, so that's essentially the plan for today, Thursday, and tomorrow, Friday. So if you have any questions about it, let me know, and I'll be happy to go in any further depth or clarification that you need. So read the poem, do the study guide, look at the summary, watch the video if you need it. That's essentially it. All right. Have a good day.